Another forum being held here at the conference in Denver is called Energy Policy. It's government regulations that affect unconventional resource development. And to talk to us a little bit about that is the moderator of the session, Edith, Allison. Thanks very much for joining us.
My pleasure. Happy to see you.
Perhaps you can tell us your title and what you do.
Yes, I am Policy Director for the American Association of Petroleum Geologists. So I work in Washington, D.C., trying to communicate science about petroleum to Congress and to federal agencies. And I also tell AAPG members about what is going on in Washington that may impact their lives.
Okay. The session hasn't been held yet. We're actually getting a chance to talk to you before it takes place. For people expecting to attend, or for those watching here on YouTube, what would they expect to get out of that session?
Well, we're going to talk about, or the speakers are going to talk about the regulations that regarding how oil and gas drilling and completion is done that are regulated by the states, and in comparison how they are regulated by the federal government on federal lands. And this relates, of course, to the cost and the complexity of drilling a well. It's also an important policy question because the federal government and the states' governments are somewhat in competition in the view of the public as to which would be the better regulator, because there's public concern about the potential for pollution from oil and gas operations, especially hydraulic fracturing.
Right. And when you look at are the two governments not trying to work together on this?
Oh no, they definitely work together, but the federal government is required to have a certain rules to protect the federal lands, which of course are used for everything, not just oil and gas, but they have to protect wildlife, they have to be available for fishing, for timber, for hiking and scenery. So there's a number of obligations to federal lands. When it's private lands, where the states do the regulation, an individual landowner has the right to personally decide what it is he would like to be done with his land. Mm-hmm. And he can decide to lease it to an oil and gas company or not.
Mm-hmm. We're from Alberta, and there's been a couple of big pipelines that we've been talking about up there. The Northern Gateway, which would go from the oil sands to BC, and of course the Keystone XL pipeline, which is coming down here. It seems like there are an awful lot of regulations, and which is not necessarily a bad thing, but the process seems to be drawn out for a long period of time, and it seems to be getting longer.
I think you're absolutely correct. Mm-hmm. The process to take a pipeline across this federal boundary requires that the State Department determine that it is in the national interest. Now, they conducted a detailed study, and the conclusion from that was that the pipeline would not create additional pollution because it would not encourage additional oil sands production. Mm-hmm. And that it would be in the national interest. However, after they conducted that analysis, they're required to consult with the people of the United States and to work through a number of government agencies to do that. And so the public had very strong opinions, both for and against the pipeline. And so the process of making the decision is taking a long time to consider all of the opinions of outside groups. Mm-hmm. And of course, it's become more and more politicized as each week goes by. So the decision will actually be made by the State Department, who's in charge of international affairs, but it will certainly influence the President of the United States, and he will probably want to say something. And so they're going very slowly to make sure that they don't make any mistakes. And of course, it's interesting because Canada is our best trading partners, and Canada is not taking this too well as an official government.
Well, no, because we've got a resource that we're trying to sell, right? That's part of it. At one time, it seemed like the oil industry was almost able to get its projects rubber stamped. Now, the regulations make sense because it does have to be overseen by another group. That doesn't seem to be a concern. It's just that the whole process, what is this doing to the industry whenever they want to embark on a large process, having to deal with all these regulations and the length of time it takes to get that stamp of approval?
I believe that the opinions are varied as to whether the federal regulatory process is taking more or less time just in connection with all oil and gas activities. The federal agencies, like the Bureau of Land Management, who deal in issuing permits for oil and gas development, say that their process is going more efficiently. Without having done a survey of how many days anything takes, everyone seems to think it's taking longer. That may be because the population of the United States is much more polarized in its opinions about greenhouse gas emissions, climate change, the value of oil, whether hydraulic fracturing is good or bad. So a polarized population leads to a polarized and slow group of regulators or legislators.
Edith, thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome.
We've been chatting with Edith Allison right here on Can I Media.